Kateryna had always loved rainy evenings. They wrapped the world in softness, blurred sharp edges, and made the city feel quieter, smaller, like it belonged only to her. On such evenings, her cafe, a cozy little corner tucked between a flower shop and an old bookstore, turned into a cocoon of warmth and silence. Fewer customers came when the streets gleamed with puddles and reflections. That night was no different. She stood behind the counter, wiping clean cups that no one had touched for hours. The gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of porcelain, the low hum of a jazz playlist, all sounds she had grown used to. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the windows, tracing erratic paths down the glass. Then the bell above the door rang. She looked up. He stepped in like a frame from another life, tall, well-dressed, composed. His dark coat was slick with rain, and his eyes were what struck her first, calm, steady, the color of cold steel. There was something old in them, not in age, but in gravity. He removed his coat carefully and looked around. Then he walked toward the window seat, the one she secretly thought of as hers when the cafe was empty. He sat with the elegance of a man who belonged in silence. She approached with the menu. "Good evening," she said softly, smiling. "Coffee?" He looked up at her then, and for a moment, everything else blurred. "Yes, black," he said, "no sugar." His voice was low, restrained, not cold, but deliberate. It made her curious. She nodded and walked away, but something shifted in her chest. She didn't understand it, not yet, but something about the way he sat, the way he spoke, as if he carried a room of thoughts wherever he went, made her heart beat just a little faster. He came again the next day. And the day after that. Always during the last hour, always the same seat, always coffee, black. At first, they exchanged only a few words, then sentences, then stories. He told her about his work, vague but intellectual, something to do with international business, contracts, meetings. He'd traveled often, he said, lived in Warsaw, Paris, sometimes Berlin. He loved books, classical music, long walks after midnight. Kateryna listened the way people listen when something inside them begins to stir. She asked questions. She laughed at things that weren't exactly jokes. She felt her world grow wider, stranger, richer. She told him about her dreams, the ones she had packed away years ago, how she wanted to write, how she sometimes wrote letters she never sent, how she once thought she'd leave her town by 21, but life had other plans. He listened with the same intensity she admired in his eyes, as if nothing outside their table existed. One night, when the cafe was nearly empty and the rain was especially heavy, she brought his coffee without asking. "I think you read too many sad books," she said playfully. He smiled. "I think I live in one." And something in her heart clenched. Weeks passed. The cafe became their world, a clockless, seasonless world. There were no confessions, no flirting, no games. Only long talks, shared glances, and silence, the kind that deepened, not hollowed. Then came the night everything changed. It was near closing, the rain was loud on the roof, no one else had come. Kateryna was wiping down the counter when she felt him behind her. She turned, and he looked at her differently, not urgently, not greedily. Just, truthfully. "Katya," he said, and it was the first time he'd used a shorter version of her name. "I can't hide it anymore, I've fallen in love with you." Her breath caught. The silence between them stretched, long, fragile. She looked at him, his stillness, the way he didn't reach for her, the way he seemed ready to walk away if she said no. And she whispered, "Me too." For the briefest moment, the world aligned. Until he said, "I'm married." Her heart didn't break all at once. It cracked, quietly. Like glass under pressure. I love my wife, he continued. I respect her, but I haven't felt alive in years, not until you. She stood still, the rag still in her hand, the smell of coffee in the air. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, but I don't want to lie to you. She didn't speak. What could she say? Her feelings were real, her heart was open, but now it was caught in a fire she hadn't seen coming. The cafe lights flickered slightly, a car passed by outside, casting moving shadows across the floor. I should go, he said softly. But he didn't move. Neither did she. That was the first night she didn't sleep. After that night, he didn't come for 3 days. The cafe felt colder, the music too loud. Kateryna moved through her shifts like a shadow, polite, quiet, automatic. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window seat, now empty, always empty. And each time she looked, a part of her whispered, he regretted it, he left, it's over ***. On the 4th evening, he returned. Same coat, same quiet eyes. But when he looked at her, she felt her knees soften. I shouldn't be here, he said, but I couldn't stay away. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Instead, she brought him coffee, and this time, she sat across from him. No one else was in the cafe. He reached across the table, slowly, cautiously, like asking permission. She placed her hand in his. And in that moment, her skin against his, the warmth, the electricity, there was no right or wrong. Just breath. And silence. And something between them that had already gone too far. Their affair didn't begin with a kiss. It began with hours. Stolen, quiet hours. Early mornings, when the city was still sleeping. Late nights, when the cafe had closed and the lights were dim. They never talked about his wife. Kateryna never asked questions. She didn't want answers. If she made it real, it would become wrong. If she called it love, it would become a lie. So they created their own rules. They met in places without names, side streets, empty parks, the back of bookstores. They talked about music, dreams, childhood memories, people they had lost. And sometimes, they didn't talk at all. Sometimes, she just rested her head on his shoulder and listened to the rhythm of his breath. Andrei never made promises. But he never left, either. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. And she let herself believe it. Even as guilt gnawed at her spine like rot beneath the floorboards. Kateryna had never known this kind of ache. It wasn't lust. It wasn't fantasy. It was deep. Like he had walked into her soul and rearranged the furniture. She knew every moment was borrowed. Every kiss stolen. Every laugh made of glass. But still, she couldn't stop. She lived in 2 worlds. By day, she smiled at customers, brewed coffee, paid rent. By night, she curled into his arms in a rented apartment neither of them dared to decorate. When he left, she would lie in his scent, still warm on the pillow, and cry into the mattress, quietly, so the neighbors wouldn't hear. She had become the other woman. And she hated herself for it. But she loved him more. Sometimes, she imagined his wife. A tall woman, cold, elegant. Someone distant and busy. Someone who had forgotten how to look at him. But then, late one night, Andrei whispered, "She's a good person." And Kateryna felt something twist in her chest. He wasn't with a villain. He wasn't trapped. He was loved. And she was the earthquake tearing through that love. Autumn turned to winter. The rain became snow. Their walks shorter, their meetings riskier. He gave her a scarf once. Soft gray wool. He said it reminded him of the way she looked when she read. She wore it every day, even when she was alone. Especially then. It felt like proof that he saw her. that she existed somewhere outside of shadows. But love that hides eventually starts to suffocate. She began to feel it in her skin, the way she flinched when someone said his name by accident. The way her hands shook when her phone rang and it wasn't him. She became obsessed with time. How little they had. How it never belonged to them fully. "How long can we live like this?" she asked him once. He didn't answer. Just pulled her closer, kissed her hair, and said, "Not forever." But forever was what she wanted. She wanted mornings. She wanted to cook for him. To argue over laundry. To fall asleep with him on Sundays and wake up to his breath. She didn't want to share him with another life. Another woman. Another world. One evening, after the cafe closed, he walked her home. Snow fell in soft waves around them. Their steps left no sound. Outside her building, he stood still. "I wish I had met you first," he said. She looked at him. Really looked. His coat, his face, his hands, always steady. The man she loved. The man she would never have. Would it have changed anything? She asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, she lay awake, the scarf wrapped around her like armor. Tears slipped silently onto her pillow. And she whispered into the dark, "I don't want to be a secret anymore." Winter blurred into spring. But for Kateryna, the seasons stopped meaning anything. Time was no longer measured in days or weeks, but in his arrivals, and his absences. There were nights when he texted, "I'm on my way." And she lit candles, fixed her hair, put on soft music. And there were nights when he didn't text at all. No call. No warning. Just silence. She never asked questions. She didn't want the answers. Instead, she waited. Like a ghost trapped in the hallway of her own life. Hovering near the door. Hoping the lock would turn. She stopped telling friends where she went at night. Stopped answering calls from her sister. Avoided eye contact with her landlord. The cafe became background noise. Her world was shrinking, into the shape of a man who didn't belong to her. Sometimes she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Not just the tired eyes. Or the weight she'd lost. Or the way her clothes hung differently. It was the look in her gaze. Hollow. Hungry. Like she was always searching for something, someone, that kept slipping through her fingers. Andrei, for his part, never made promises. But sometimes he said things like, "Maybe next year." Or "Things are complicated right now." Or "She's been going through a hard time." Kateryna nodded, always. She understood. She was patient. She was kind. Because love, she believed, meant sacrifice. Until one day, sitting across from him at the cafe long after it had closed, she asked the question that had been burning in her chest for months. "Do you ever feel guilty?" He looked at her for a long time, then said, quietly, "Every day." And somehow, that made it worse. She began to hate Sundays. That was the day he never came. The day he was always busy. She told herself it was normal, a family day. But the word made her sick now. Family. A word she wanted so badly. A future she dreamed of. A life that would never be hers. She imagined his wife's hands. What they looked like on his collar. How they felt when they touched his face. The thought made her chest tighten. Made her hate herself. Made her ache with a jealousy so sharp, it bordered on rage. One rainy afternoon, while walking home, she passed a woman pushing a stroller. A man held an umbrella over them both. They laughed. Their child laughed. And Kateryna's feet stopped moving. She stood in the middle of the street, cold drops soaking through her coat, watching strangers have the life she would never allow herself to dream of anymore. When she got home that night, she didn't light candles. She didn't put on music. She didn't wait for him. She lay on the floor and cried without sound. 2 weeks passed. He didn't come. No messages. No explanations. The silence was worse than any goodbye. Then, late one night, her phone buzzed. "I miss you. Can I see you?" Her hands trembled. She typed a dozen replies, erased them all. She wanted to say, "Where were you? Why now? Do I only exist when you need escape?" But instead, she wrote, come. And she hated herself for it. When he arrived, she didn't cry, didn't yell. She let him in, and they made love with a desperation that frightened her. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't soft. It was the kind of intimacy born of starvation, of people who know time is running out, and can't bear to waste a second. Afterward, she lay with her back to him, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Andrei whispered, "I can't lose you." And for the first time, she didn't believe him. Because the truth was, he had never had her. Not really. Not the way she needed. That night, long after he'd fallen asleep, she rose quietly from the bed. She stood in the kitchen, wrapped in his forgotten scent, staring out the window at the city that had never once looked back at her. And in her chest, for the first time, was a single, steady thought. I want more. Not just more love. More truth. More life. More of herself. She poured herself a glass of water, then picked up her phone. She typed, "I can't be a secret anymore," and pressed send. She expected a reply. Something. Anything. Even silence with meaning. But his answer came hours later, short, dry, wrong. "Let's talk tomorrow." Tomorrow. A word she had heard so many times that it no longer meant soon. It meant never. It meant not today. Not enough. Not you. She stared at the screen, waiting for her heart to break. But it didn't. It just slowed. As if it had finally grown tired of beating for someone who never came when she truly needed him. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. The sky was pale. The air smelled of damp stone and street dust. It had rained all night. Kateryna unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and stood at the counter. The same counter where they had shared countless quiet glances. The same seat by the window where he'd once told her he loved her. Everything looked the same. But something inside her had shifted. Tilted. She brewed a single cup of coffee, his favorite, black, no sugar. And then she sat at his table, alone. She waited for him. Not because she thought he'd come, but because she wanted to feel the moment she stopped waiting. She watched the steam curl from the cup, watched the hands on the clock tick past the minute they used to call their time. He didn't come. And still, her hands were steady. After her shift, she walked home in the drizzle, the weight of her decision sinking in like rain into cotton. She opened her small closet, pulled out the suitcase she hadn't touched in years. She filled it slowly, deliberately. A few books, the gray scarf, her grandmother's teacup, a small framed photo of her childhood home. She left the watercolor painting Andrei had once said reminded him of her. She didn't want to take pieces of him into the next life. She bought a train ticket to a city she'd never been to. Not far, but far enough. A place where no one knew her face, her story, her sorrow. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. No letters. No confessions. No closure. She simply left. Quietly. Like she had lived. The train ride was long and silent. She watched trees blur into sky. Stations drift by like forgotten birthdays. She sat with her palms in her lap, her phone face down, her heart both heavy and light. It didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. It felt like grief. But grief, she knew, meant there had been love. Real love. Even if it never had a chance to live in daylight. The city was louder, bigger, full of strangers and sirens and neon light. She found a small apartment with creaking floors and a window that overlooked a grocery store. She got a job in a bookstore cafe, slower, softer, quieter. No one there knew her story. They only knew her name. And that, for a while, was enough. She didn't hear from Andrei for weeks. Then, one rainy evening, of course it was raining, she got a message. "Are you okay?" Nothing more. "No, I miss you." "No, I'm sorry." Just that. She stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally, she wrote. "I'm breathing, that's all that matters." She didn't send it. She closed her phone, took a deep breath, and poured herself a glass of wine. That night, she dreamed of him. Not of the way he looked, but of the sound of his voice saying her name, the way no one else ever had. And she woke with tears on her cheeks, and her hand curled around empty sheets. But slowly, slowly, the ache dulled. She started to smile more. She found joy in small things, a handwritten note from a customer, the way sunlight warmed her table at noon, the sound of jazz from the record store below her apartment. She painted again, not often, not well, but with color. She made a friend, laughed at things that had nothing to do with memory. And some days, not many, but some, she went a whole 24 hours without thinking of him. That felt like a miracle. Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the edges. Kateryna didn't wake up crying anymore. She didn't wait for messages. She no longer clutched her pillow at night like it might carry his scent. What remained wasn't pain, not sharp, not constant. It was something else. A kind of hollow warmth, like touching the imprint of a hand long after it's gone. She moved through her days with calm. She became that kind of woman people liked, quiet, capable, kind. She remembered birthdays, smiled at children, read poetry on buses. She lived. His name stopped coming up in her thoughts like a wound. Now, it came like a breeze, unexpected, fleeting, gone before she could decide whether to chase it. She still had the gray scarf. It hung in the back of her closet, untouched. Not out of bitterness, but out of reverence. A relic of a different life. Of the woman she used to be. And slowly, that woman faded. 2 years passed. She met Dmitro at the bookstore. He asked her about the book in her hands, something about stars and grief and parallel lives. He smiled like he had nowhere else to be. He didn't rush her. Didn't try too hard. They had coffee. Then lunch. Then long walks where silence didn't feel like a test. He never asked too many questions. And she never offered too many answers. But he held her hand like it was sacred. And for the first time in years, she didn't flinch when someone looked at her like she was enough. Their wedding was simple. A summer day. A white dress she'd chosen in 20 minutes. A garden. Laughter. Peace. Not fire. Not trembling. Just peace. They built a life, slow, gentle, real. They moved into a larger apartment. Painted the kitchen yellow. Named their plants. They had children. 2. A girl with her eyes. A boy with Dimitro's calm. She loved them fiercely. Differently than she had loved Andrei. Not with hunger. But with presence. She cooked for them, sang to them, kissed their knees when they fell. She didn't vanish into them. She remained whole. And that was her victory. But some nights, when the children were asleep, when the rain tapped softly at the windows, she sat alone in the kitchen, and remembered. Not often. Not deeply. But truthfully. She'd close her eyes, and feel his fingers on hers in the back of that old cafe. Hear the way he said her name, like a secret. Smell coffee and winter and something impossible. She didn't cry. Not anymore. But she let herself feel. Just enough to remember that she had once burned. She never told Dimitro. Not out of shame. But because that love lived in a different language, one that didn't belong in this life. He knew she had loved before. He never asked for more. And for that, she was grateful. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, she found a letter. Unsent. Unfinished. Her own handwriting, folded between two notebooks. Andrei, asterisk if you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to send it. But I needed to write it anyway. To give the words somewhere to live other than my chest, asterisk. She read the rest slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was just honest. A letter from the version of herself that had once believed love could survive anything. She didn't throw it away. She didn't burn it. She placed it in a drawer. And left it there, with other memories that no longer needed her attention. Years passed. Her daughter asked her one day, "Mama, were you ever in love before Papa?" Kateryna smiled. "A kind of love," she said, "yes." "Did it hurt?" She thought for a long moment. Then answered, "It taught me what not to forget." Her daughter blinked, confused, but nodded. And that was enough. It was an ordinary afternoon. The kind of day you forget. Sunlight through green leaves. Children laughing in the distance. Birds swooping low in soft arcs. Kateryna had taken the kids to the park after school. They raced ahead, leaving her a few quiet minutes with her thoughts. She sat on a bench near the pond, opened a book she hadn't really been reading for weeks, and tried not to think about dinner. And that's when she saw him. At first, it didn't register. Just another man on another bench. But then he shifted, and the sunlight hit his face at just the right angle. Something in her stomach dropped. Her fingers clenched around the book. It was him. Andrei. Older. Yes. But still him. The same thoughtful expression. The same posture, slightly hunched, like the world weighed too much. And those same storm-gray eyes, now fixed on the water, lost in thought. He didn't see her. Not yet. She could leave. She could gather her things and walk away. No one would ever know. But her feet didn't move. Instead, her heart, traitorous, wild, began to race. Not with longing, but with memory. And grief. And something like fear. A small voice broke through her trance. "Mama, look, I climbed the rock." Her son. Smiling, proud, breathless. She smiled back, too wide, too fast. "Bravo, baby!" And in that moment, as she turned her head from her son back to the pond, Andrei looked up. Their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp. No slow-motion music. Just a look. Long. Charged. And then he stood. Tentative. Uncertain. But moving toward her, all the same. She stood too, instinct, defense, maybe reflex. He stopped a few feet away. Katya. She hadn't heard that voice in years. But her name sounded the same. She didn't answer. Just looked at him. Taking him in. Older, yes. But still that man who had unraveled her life with a single confession in a coffee shop. He looked nervous. Hopeful. I didn't expect. She nodded. Neither did I. They stood there, suspended between lives, while her children laughed behind them. And a jogger passed by. And the ducks quacked at nothing in particular. Do you live here? He asked. She hesitated. I do. With. She nodded again. My husband, my children. He looked down. Then back at her. And you, still married? He gave a small, dry laugh. Yes, technically. She raised an eyebrow. Things are not the same. They never are, she thought. He stepped closer. Only slightly. You look beautiful. She didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Don't, she said gently. He nodded. I'm sorry, it's just. I think about you. She sighed. I don't live there anymore, Andrei. His eyes flickered. I know, but sometimes I wonder if part of me still does. She glanced behind her. Her children were playing tag now, running in circles, laughing like the world had no sharp edges. They're yours? He asked softly. She nodded. He smiled. And it wasn't jealousy. Or regret. Just something tender. Like wonder. Like almost. They sat down on the bench. Still angled toward each other but not too close. The air between them was full of questions. But they didn't ask any of them. Instead, he said, I'm glad you're happy. She paused. Then answered honestly. I am, most days. He smiled again. It didn't reach his eyes. Me too, he said. But not all. When it was time to leave, she stood. I have to go. He nodded. Of course. She hesitated. Then reached into her bag, pulled out a small piece of paper, and scribbled something on it. It wasn't her number. It wasn't an address. Just a sentence. She handed it to him, closed his hand around it, and turned to call her children. As they walked away, he opened the paper. And read her handwriting, neat and unshaken. What we had was real, but so is what I have now. He didn't follow. And she didn't look back. But as the clouds shifted above her, and her son reached for her hand, and her daughter asked if they could have ice cream, she knew something had shifted inside her again. Not broken. Not reopened. Just seen. It started with messages. Nothing explicit. Just, that park again? Or, I'd like to hear your voice. She didn't reply at first. But the second week, when the children were with her mother for the day, and the sky was soft with clouds, she walked to the park anyway. He was there. He always knew she would be. They sat on the same bench. This time, a little closer. Not touching, not yet. He asked how her daughter liked school. She asked if he still read in the mornings. They talked like old friends. Carefully. Softly. Like people handling something fragile. She told herself it was harmless. They hadn't kissed. They hadn't touched. She went home to her husband every night. She cooked dinner. Helped with homework. Washed tiny socks. But she knew. She knew the part of herself that had once left the cafe behind, was beginning to listen for footsteps again. The meetings became weekly. Then twice a week. Sometimes just 15 minutes. A walk. A bench. A coffee, to go, shared beneath umbrellas. He never pressured. Never asked for more. And maybe that was what made it worse. He gave her space to fall in again. And she did, quietly, slowly, without telling her feet to stop. One afternoon, she let her hand linger on his. Only a second. Just enough to remember. To confirm that the warmth was still real. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. Guilt came like a tide. At night. When Dimitro kissed her shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for today." When her son handed her a drawing of their family, stick figures smiling beneath a sun. 4 of them. Only 4. When her daughter asked why she sometimes stared out the window like she was listening to something only she could hear. She cried into her pillow once. Then wiped her face. Made breakfast. Braided hair. And kept going. Andrei gave her a book one day. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with a simple string. It reminded me of us. He said. She didn't open it right away. She waited until the children were asleep. Until the house was still. It was a poetry collection. Margins filled with his underlines. His notes. Lines like, we were a temporary truth in a world built for permanence. She lived in my silences more than anyone lived in my words. Her heart ached. Not from love. But from knowing that even time couldn't make her forget how seen she once felt. One meeting turned into a walk along the river. She told him about her new job, managing the cafe instead of just serving. He told her about his father's illness. The air between them was heavy, but never urgent. It was never about sex. It was about remembering. About feeling known. About the comfort of someone who had once broken your heart, so cleanly you never stopped bleeding. Then, one afternoon, a rainy one, of course, he walked her home. Not to her door. Just the corner. They stood in silence. He looked at her like he had years ago. The first time he said her name like it was more than just a word. And she whispered, "I can't do this." He didn't argue. He nodded. But he didn't leave. His hand reached up, slowly, to brush her hair behind her ear. A touch so small, so careful, but it burned. And in that moment, all the years between them disappeared. No rings. No children. No spouses. Just the girl who once believed in coffee shop fairy tales, and the man who never had the courage to be hers. She didn't kiss him. But she thought about it for days. Later that night, Dimitro asked if something was wrong. She said no. Because what do you call a sadness that comes from remembering joy you were never allowed to keep? In the days that followed, she avoided the park. Avoided her phone. She poured herself into motherhood like it was penance. She cleaned too hard. Laughed too loudly. Stayed busy. But the quiet came for her anyway. In the moments between songs. In the smell of espresso. In the way a certain poem opened like a wound. One morning, her daughter asked, "Mama, did you ever love someone before Papa?" Kateryna paused. Then said softly, "Yes, I did. Why didn't you stay with him?" She thought for a long time. And finally said, "Because love isn't always enough." Her daughter nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a lesson meant for later. And Kateryna turned away, tears brimming, knowing some truths live only in the spaces between sentences. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a pattern, a pulse beneath her skin, a second life growing quietly inside her days. And for the first time since she left him, Kateryna felt the weight of betrayal not just as a fear, but as a fact. Because this time, she wasn't the girl in the cafe. She was a wife. A mother. And that made everything different. That made everything worse. She met Andrei again. Once more. Not planned, but not entirely accidental. A bookstore this time. Neutral territory. No park bench. No hidden glances. She had told herself it would be closure. That she would walk in, see his face, and finally be free of it. But the moment she saw him, everything in her softened. He smiled, small, weary, real. "I thought maybe you'd stopped walking toward me," he said. She didn't answer. He took a step forward. "I think about you more now than I ever did back then." That was the problem. That was the ache. That even after all this time, the idea of him still lived where reason couldn't reach. They sat on a bench just outside. She told him about her son's stutter, how he now sang to overcome it, how brave he was. He told her about his mother's passing, how he couldn't cry at the funeral, how his wife had sat beside him but never touched his hand. And as the street lamp flickered above them, he asked, "Do you ever wonder?" She turned toward him. All the time. His fingers brushed hers, just once. But that was all it took. The floodgate opened. The hunger. The fire. The terrible joy of remembering what it felt like to be chosen, even in secret. She leaned toward him, not all the way, but enough. And then stopped. Pulled back. Breathed in like she hadn't for days. "I can't." He looked at her, not pleading, not angry. Just, knowing. "I would never ask you to ruin your life," he said. "But you already are," she whispered. And for the first time, he looked away. That night, Kateryna stood in the kitchen. Barefoot, robe clinging to her spine. As Dmytro walked in behind her, kissed her neck, and said, "You've been quiet lately." She turned, met his eyes. He looked tired, but open. Still the man who offered her peace when she had nothing to give. And in that moment, the guilt surged. It rose in her throat like salt water, like storm surge. She almost confessed. Almost gave him the truth, raw, bloody, ugly. But instead she said, "I've just been thinking a lot." He nodded, brushed her cheek. "You carry too much, you always have." She smiled, and hated herself for it. Days passed. She didn't see Andrei. Didn't reply to his messages. Didn't walk past the places that used to pull her in. But he lived inside her now, not as a fantasy, but as a question. Is this all I am allowed to want? One evening, she lit a candle, sat at her desk, and began to write. Not to him. To herself. A letter she never intended to send. Dear girl who still dreams of the cafe, you are not wrong for having loved him. You are not evil for remembering. But you must choose now, not between men, but between truths. You cannot keep walking the line between who you were and who you are now. You must decide where your feet belong. She folded the letter, tucked it between the pages of an old book, and blew out the candle. The next morning, she told Dmytro she wanted to go away for a weekend. Alone. He didn't question it. He kissed her hand. Held her gaze. "Come back rested," he said. And that nearly undid her. She took the train to a small town by the water. Walked for hours. Ate alone. Read on benches. She wrote nothing. Spoke to no one. But in the silence, she found something she hadn't expected. Not peace, but distance. Enough to see both lives clearly, the one she lived, and the one she still carried like a pressed flower in a secret book. She stood on a cliff overlooking the water, wind pulling at her coat, and whispered aloud, "I was loved. I was torn. But I am still whole." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Plain. Unmarked. Folded neatly into the pages of a book she didn't remember lending. It had no return address. Only her name, written in handwriting she hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly. Andrei. For a moment, she stood frozen. Her heart beat once, hard, then waited. She turned the envelope in her hands, as if it might vanish if she touched it too roughly. Then, slowly, she opened it. One page. No greeting. No date. Only his words. Kateryna. I thought about seeing you again, and saying all of this face to face. But I think we both know the truth needs quiet and space. There are things I never told you. Things I never gave you. And it's time I did, even if too late. You once asked if I felt guilty. I told you yes. But the truth is, it wasn't guilt that kept me from choosing you. It was cowardice. I didn't want to lose what I had, even when what I had was crumbling. Even when you were the first person in years who made me feel alive. You were not a mistake. You were never a mistake. You were the warmth in a cold season. The music in silence. The story I never deserved to be written into. She paused. Her throat tight. Fingers trembling. Tears pooling without falling. But she kept reading. I want you to know that I followed your life from a distance. Not in a way that crossed boundaries. But enough to know you married. That you're a mother. That you built something real. And I am glad. God, Katya, I am so glad. Because even if I was never your future, you were always the part of my past that I hold gently. I still walk by the cafe sometimes. It closed, you know. Boarded up. But I swear, when it rains, I still hear your voice echoing from inside. I think part of me will always be sitting at that table by the window, waiting for you to bring me coffee I didn't need, just to see you smile. You taught me that love isn't always meant to stay. Sometimes, it's meant to remind us we're still alive. Thank you for waking me up, even if I didn't know how to stay awake. Andrei. She folded the letter slowly, set it down beside her tea, and just sat there. No tears. No collapse. Just silence, but not the kind that hurts. The kind that finally makes room. That night, she didn't tell Dmitro about the letter. Not because it was a secret, but because it was finished. She didn't feel pulled. She didn't feel torn. She felt closed. Like a chapter carefully turned. The next day, she took the letter and walked to the river. She stood on the footbridge where children dropped flowers in spring, and lovers carved initials into wood. She didn't throw the letter away. She read it one last time, folded it again, then tucked it into her coat pocket. She kept it, not for longing, but for truth. Some stories don't belong in fire. They belong in memory. In the quiet drawer of a life still being lived. That night, her daughter asked, "Mama, do you believe people can love more than one person in a lifetime?" Kateryna smiled. Yes. But sometimes, one love teaches you how to choose the next one better. Life returned. Not all at once, not in fireworks or revelations, but in small, quiet ways. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. The way Kateryna started humming in the kitchen again. The way her laughter grew rounder, less fragile. The way she looked at her children, not just with love, but with presence. She had come back. Not from Andrei. Not from a betrayal, but from that fragile middle place, the one between memory and regret. She had crossed it. And now, she was here. Dmytro didn't ask where she'd been during that weekend alone. He didn't need to. Instead, he made her tea the night she returned, set it quietly beside her, pressed his hand to her back, just once, and said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but I'm glad you're home." She nearly wept at the mercy in that. But instead, she reached for his hand, and held it like a vow. She didn't see Andrei again. Not in bookstores. Not in parks. Not in dreams. But sometimes, when it rained, she would walk by a cafe window, and feel that strange flicker in her chest. Not pain. Not longing. Just the memory of a different version of herself, the girl who loved wildly, who broke quietly, who lived in shadows for someone who couldn't stand in the light. And now she could look at that girl and whisper, "You were brave. But I don't need to be her anymore." Years passed. The children grew. The apartment walls filled with crayon drawings and half-read books, with socks that never found their match, with laughter echoing through the hall at 7 a.m. Kateryna never told them the full story. Not because she was hiding, but because not all truths are meant to be inherited. Some are meant to be lived, learned, and then let go. On her 40th birthday, Dmytro surprised her with a small getaway, just the two of them. No plans. No obligations. They stayed in a seaside inn, drank wine on the balcony, and watched the waves move in slow, unhurried rhythm. On their last night, he looked at her across the table and said, "You know, you've always felt like the calm after a storm." She smiled. "No," she said softly. "I was the storm. You were the harbor." Later that night, she sat on the balcony alone. The wind moved gently through her hair. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing piano. She pulled out a journal, one she hadn't written in for months. And she wrote a single line. "I forgave him. I forgave myself. And I chose to stay." She didn't write anything else. She didn't need to. Back home, life carried on. There were bills. Arguments about bedtime. Cracked plates. Hugs that lasted too long because no one wanted to let go. And in the middle of it all, Kateryna. Still the same. Entirely different. Not because of the love that almost was, but because of the love that stayed.